Hi everybody, welcome to Contemplative Psychedelic Psychology, some Eastern, Western, and visionary models of the mind. Before we get started with today's talk, I'd just like to mention that OPS tries to make its events as free as possible. So the best way to support us is by buying our merch. Our merch officer, Scarlett, is going to be selling the merch after the talk. And without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker, June McDaniel. So June is a professor emerita at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, America, where she specialized in the study of religious experience, especially in the Hindu tradition. She's the author of 3 books on India, a co-edited volume on mysticism, a co-edited volume on Hindu religious experience, a book on current views of ecstasy in the field of religious studies, and many articles. Her MTS was in theological studies from Emory University, and her PhD was in the history of religions from the Divinity School at the University of Chicago. She spent 2 years in India on grants from the American Institute of Indian Studies and is a Fulbright Senior Research Scholar, and she also traveled there on shorter research trips. She's currently working on religion in Bali, Indonesia. Without further ado, I'll let you take it away, June.
Okay, just as a brief warning, when I came through Heathrow last week, I think I picked up some ailment. So if I have to run off for a moment quickly, don't worry about it, I will be back. Okay, and that warning being done, we're going over to the talk. All right, so this is a paper, or really a talk, that's going to be on mapping. One of the things that struck me as most important when we look at the study of psychedelics is that there's a lot of argument about whether they work, how they work, are they the brain, are they not the brain, maybe we're going somewhere. But if we go somewhere, where are we going? And what do we do when we get there? There seems to be absolutely no consistent idea. So what we're looking at here is ways that we have of understanding those states. And we'll explore some models of the mind, and as you can tell from the topic of the talk, we'll begin with Western ideas, move to Eastern ideas, and then some psychedelic ideas. All of these give different perspectives on how the mind is structured. Okay, so contemplation I have as a way of exploring the depths of the human mind. So we can have prayer or meditation on spiritual matters. We can use that as a definition. And we'll briefly look at some types of Western psychology. Then we'll move to Eastern, then we'll move to my own theories. So we're moving from something familiar, hopefully, to a little less familiar, to something totally strange for you. So we start with psychoanalytic. That's the Freudian approach. They have 2 models or constructions or topographies of the mind. That was the term that Freud actually liked. So we have the conscious mind, the preconscious, and the unconscious. And for him, the preconscious was accessible memory. The unconscious was inaccessible memory. He also gave a secondary topography, or a secondary organization of the mind, where he said that there were 3 layers. The superego was the conscience. He thought that was adopted from the society in which you grow up. You have an ego, which is your sense of the individual self, who you are as a person. And then the id, which was the libido, the source of the instincts. And he thought sexuality and death were very important in terms of the pulls that are on the ego. In fact, he thought the ordinary situation for people was basically neurosis, because you're in a constant struggle between the superego and the id. And what you had was the ego trying to balance these things out. So basically, neurosis was the best you could hope for. And the way he saw the mind was sort of like an iceberg. So what you see on top up there is the conscious mind, and below it, all that is the unconscious.
Could you turn on the light, Pop?
Yeah, is it possible to have the lights a little lower here so you could see the pictures a bit more dramatically? I think they're in the process. Okay, that's important. Okay, so note that the depths of the iceberg are separate from the waters. We saw people as basically individuals limited by the brain and biology. There was no deeper link between human beings. The unconscious is memory, especially traumatic memory, and there are no deeper spiritual aspects unless we count archaic remnants, which is something he argued about with Carl Jung. Are there any hangovers from man's archaic past? And it's a subject for debate even today with Freudians. What is deepest in the personality is repressed pain to be helped by psychoanalysis. So when we think of Freudian psychology and psychoanalysis, we're dealing with traumatic memory. What you want to do is get rid of the traumas, basically the way Freud phrased it, where id was, there ego shall be. So all those problems in your unconscious will come to your conscious mind, and then you'll know about all your problems, and then they won't control you anymore, but you're still not going to be happy. So he had a lot of interesting ideas on trauma, psychological trauma, or mental trauma as an emotional response. He also accepted there would be flashbacks and other kinds of responses to trauma. And he was the first physician to emphasize the importance of trauma. Okay, this is something that we see influencing later forms of psychoanalysis and ideas of the mind. Now, another model that came to be popular in academia, it sort of came and went, we might say, for about 50 years, was the behaviorist model of the mind. And the behaviorist structure said that we had a conscious mind, in that he agreed with Freud. But what was really important was conditioning and learning. And at the base of conditioning and learning, we had the brain or the physical body. There is no area of consciousness. There's no unconscious realm of the mind, and for some, consciousness itself is also questionable. So if we say what is psychology, it is brain science, and all actions are shaped by external stimuli. I had a friend in the psych department who was doing social psychology. She said whenever she went to a conference and somebody mentioned consciousness, people screwed up their noses as if there was a bad smell in the room. Consciousness. Nobody wanted to hear about that. So, focus of behaviorism is conditioned behavior and how to alter it. And they did a lot of work with animals, such as this guy over here. And a more modern variant, as behaviorism kind of went down in status, cognitive psychology went up. And that's the study of mental processes such as attention, language use, memory, perception, and thought. And once again, we see an avoidance of the whole issue of consciousness. Cognitive neuroscience studies correlations between physiological brain activity and claimed mental states. And often when you look at their writing, claimed is put in those scare quotes. The mind is rooted in the brain, and you do not look for a mind outside of the brain. Another form of psychology is Jungian psychology, which never got the status that either of the other two did. It was based on Freud's ideas, but Jung believed there was more to the unconscious than repressed memories. Jung had been a student of Freud, and they got along very well until they started getting into this debate about the nature of consciousness and whether there was anything beyond the physical brain. Jung included more levels. He had the conscious mind with awareness. He had the personal unconscious with traumas, very much like Freud. But he also had the collective unconscious with the collective memories of the human race over time and universal symbols or archetypes that occurred over many different cultures. Transpersonal models of the mind added yet more layers, especially in books by the psychiatrist Stanislav Grof. His most famous work was Realms of the Human Unconscious. And once we start moving towards transpersonal psychology, what we see is a conscious mind, okay, pre-conscious memory, personal, unconscious. That's for inaccessible memories. We have the collective unconscious, which we have from Jung, but then we start having the transpersonal layers or bands, saying that there is something else down there. We're not specifying what it is, but they are saying that there is something. And then there is speculation about pure spirit, which once again, they are not being specific about. So if we compare the psychologies, I just did a little chart here to show you how they compare. And what you can see is that there's much more interest in consciousness itself in the whole area of the transpersonal. So major questions. What is beyond the personal unconscious? Is there only matter, neurons, or brain cells? Is there a space of collective human consciousness, which is not dependent on the brain? And is there a realm of spirit beyond ordinary consciousness? All very good questions. Okay, you can understand all that. I'm not too scratchy or too low or anything. Now, I'm going to say a few words about Jung because the other types are a little more familiar. Most people are not familiar with Jung. He understood archetypes as universal, archaic patterns and images found within the collective unconscious. And how he got interested in these was that he was looking at the dreams that his patients had. He was a psychiatrist. And he found that they were having like Babylonian sun gods and ancient Greek myths. And he found this very interesting for people who had about a fourth grade education. These people never learned about these symbols in anything in school, and yet there they were. Ancient symbols were showing up in their dreams. When they were having visions, when they were having psychoses, all sorts of unusual symbols were showing up. So he started to study them. They interested him. He compared them to the axial system of a crystal, which can organize the crystalline structure within a liquid. In other words, archetypes were potentials that could form themselves in different ways with different people. Archetypes form complexes organized into constellations and have related emotions. And he noticed how these forced people's attention inwards. For Jung, he thought that these had a goal. There was a reason people were having all these cosmic symbols. And what he called that was individuation. And he said individuation was the deepest state possible for human beings, in which all consciousness becomes accessible. So you have the potential for being aware of all different levels of consciousness. One symbolic image was the divine marriage, the union of opposites. So it's the union of the conscious mind with everything in the unconscious. Another image he used was the alchemical path to union, and Jung was quite interested in alchemy. So the symbols they have here of male and female, of upper and lower, there's all kinds of symbols here that represent union of parts of the self. And he was interested in mandalas, which we're going to get to shortly. He understood the mandala to be a symbol of wholeness, representing the deeper self. And that's a picture of Jung up there. However, his understanding of the mandala was different than the understanding that we see in Asia. There, mandalas are very specific pathways to very specific places. For Jung, each mandala was different because each person was having the contents of the unconscious arise in this visual form. So each person had his own mandala, which was his own expression of the unconscious. Whereas in the East, these are very specific, they are not individual. Before the development of transpersonal psychology, Jung's was the closest psychology in the West to Asian understandings of mind and spirit, which is why I'm using him as a kind of an intermediate as we move towards Asia. For him, wholeness or individuation was the closest a person could come to enlightenment, but as a psychiatrist, his interest was really the problems that people had, not the potentials for enlightenment. And we should note that these forms of psychology are rarely taught in modern universities. Now, here I'm speaking of the United States, and actually I'm in England right now, so perhaps somewhere in England this is taught, but in the United States you virtually never see it. The more recent emphases in psychology are applied areas like social psychology, industrial psychology, consumer psychology, educational psychology, forensic, evolutionary, experimental. It goes on. Clinical and developmental psychology are about as close as we get these days to exploring the deeper aspects of the mind. So, we move over to India. Hindu psychology includes many levels of mind and spirit. And actually, there is no one Hindu psychology. There are actually many. So I'm only going to look at a few here. We only have so much time for this talk. The goal is for the mind to be made transparent so the person can perceive its depths. Some of the oldest texts that we see them described in are the Vedas and the Upanishads, which were based on the experiences of people who meditated, people called rishis and siddhas and yogis. And we're going to look at two approaches, the Vedanta idea of the koshas and the psychology of Raja Yoga. And Vedanta comes from approximately 3,000 years ago or so, depending on the scholar. There's a lot of debate about dating, but it is, we'll say, about 1,000 years before the Christian Bible was organized. According to the model of the koshas, which literally means sheaths or layers, although sometimes it's translated as bodies, the self is like an onion with many layers. One body or sheath rests inside another. So the outermost layer is the physical body, the Annamaya kosha or rice body, which is the literal translation. But Annamaya kosha basically means the physical or food-eating body. The next one, the Pranamaya kosha, is the one that deals with prana, and prana is the vital energy that keeps these bodies together and also alive. Third one, the Manomaya kosha, deals with manas, and that is associated with thought and emotion. The fourth one is the Vijnanamaya kosha, and Gyan is the word for intellect or intelligence. So this is the deeper mind. And the innermost body is called the Anandamaya kosha, the body of bliss and joy, from the word Ananda. Very nice word. In meditation, the person travels inwardly from one to another. So you're moving from one type of energy to another. They're not actually saying that they're bodies. Body is kind of a metaphor for transforming of one energy into another. So as you move inwards, you move from one type of energy to another. The Hindu idea may be compared to Russian dolls, one inside of the other. However, the deepest self also includes all the others. So it's kind of a challenge to visualize. And sometimes they show images like this, where you have the Anandamaya kosha, Yanamaya kosha there in the middle, Pranamaya, Anandamaya, so moving that way. Now, another school of ancient Indian thought is the Raja Yoga philosophy based on the Yoga Sutra of a man named Patanjali. And most people who have heard of the Yoga Sutra have done so in yoga classes where they learn about stretching into different positions. This is not the basis of the Yoga Sutra. The Yoga Sutra deals with meditation, and actually the word asana, which people use today for stretching positions, merely means a seated position in which you meditate. You're not supposed to move around while you're in an asana. So what we understand today as yoga is a little bit different than what they used to understand long ago. There have been many commentaries about the text. I'll be talking about it from a Vedanta perspective. Again, talking about all the commentaries on the Yoga Sutras is an hour-long talk in itself. In this form of yoga philosophy, the mind is compared to an ocean. It is formed of chitta, or consciousness. Okay, so when we use the word chitta, that's what it means. It's the ocean of consciousness. Each human mind is like a drop in the cosmic ocean of consciousness. So all of our individual consciousnesses are like drops in the ocean of a vast collection of these, which are not only human, but have every form of consciousness in the universe. Human consciousness is only one small part. Chitta is subject to whirlpools that are known as the chitta vrittis. Now, a vritti is a movement, and the chitta vrittis that they're talking about specifically here are movements or waves in consciousness. So when you are at peace, your consciousness is like a very peaceful ocean. But as soon as you start to have desires, as soon as you start to have unhappiness, as soon as you start to have greed and lust and hatred, all of a sudden your mind becomes full of these whirlpools and you can't reflect on anything. And the whirlpools go around and around and you keep thinking the same desires over and over again, the same pain, the same lack of fulfillment. These are known as the chitta vrittis. They're disturbances in consciousness, circles of emotion around past events. For trauma stirs the waters and makes people pay attention to the past. And the chitta vrittis are not only limited to this life, because in Hindu thought you have many lives, so you can actually have the remnants of desires from lives long ago that are still bothering you today. You're born with these desires, you are stuck with them because you had them for so long. Painful events cause attention to circle around the memories, repeating them over and over again. And they draw people into the past, into intense emotions and ideas. So it's hard for them to live in the present and escape their power. Okay, it's believed, let me see if I wrote about this. Okay, I have it here. The goal of yogic meditation is to still the mind, to calm it and make it transparent. And the whirlpools of the mind are due to the samskaras. That was what I was looking for in the second paragraph here. The samskaras are unconscious memories that are tinged with pain. So when you have past events, these samskaras are what cause these whirlpools, and they make them go around and around again. They include passionate desire, hatred, fear of death, egotism, and ignorance. They can come from childhood or from past lives, and they're based on karma. And these samskaras, okay, these past events that are memories that have a lot of emotion to them, create vasanas. And the vasanas are karmic residues, habits, or innate tendencies, which make people act in certain ways. So if you have certain kinds of painful memories from the past, instead of acting in a way that would get you rid of it, these memories create these vasanas, these bad habits, and you end up developing these habits that make them worse instead of better. So what you have to do is find out the source of these vasanas, these sources of these habits, which are usually painful memories of the past. Now, in Hindu thought, we've never seen the word trauma used. We don't see the word trauma in Sanskrit, but the concepts are extremely similar. And the goal of yoga meditation is to find the roots of the vasanas, okay, to see why you have these destructive habits, and to make them conscious so they no longer cause projections in the physical world and distort perception. Okay, one of the things that the vasanas do is they make you see the world in a distorted way. So whatever your problem is, somehow that takes center stage, or whatever else is going on goes off to the side. So what you want to do is fix your perception by seeing the roots of these problems. And the goal is to make the mind tranquil when painful memories cease to affect the psyche and the body. So, yoga psychotherapy is based on this practice. And in fact, right at the beginning of the Yoga Sutra, we see that the goal of yogic practice is chitta vritti nirodha. Okay, what you want to do is get rid of the citta vrittis. You want to still them. So you'll be able to see clearly. When the waters inside of your consciousness are rippling, when you have these waves going on and your mind is full of whirlpools, you can't see clearly. So what you want to do is still the waters so you are able to perceive. Then you can find your true identity and explore deeper states of consciousness. But you can't get to the deeper states of consciousness until you can see clearly. So you need to do these initial stages first. And there is a tendency for people to say, oh, I'm fine, I'll just skip those initial stages and go right to the most advanced ones. And this is very bad, because it just makes the whirlpools bigger. You know, you have to go through all the stages, you can't skip them. And how it's done is through the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. And Asht, in Sanskrit, means 8, and Anga means limb. So 8 limbs means 8 different things, basically, that you work on. So, like moral actions, you lead a moral life, you don't kill and steal, you control the body, the breath, and the mind. And controlling the breath is actually part of yoga tradition. It's the later stages of meditation, called dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which allow exploration of the unconscious. This is where we get to the superconscious states. So contemplation is the path to knowledge of the self. That's a image of contemplation. Right? And as we see in the yogic view of the self, there are similarities with Western psychotherapy. The mind is disturbed by unconscious traumas. The goal of both is to limit traumatic memories and to make the person free from the pain of the past. However, yoga also accepts the existence of past lives as a source of present trauma, which Western thought does not accept. So in Raja Yoga meditation, it's active, in which the person consciously enters deeper states in order to get rid of emotional and mental impurities. So you don't just kind of sit there and wait for it to come to you. You actually exert some effort on this. And yogic meditation may also include specific techniques, such as the use of mantra. And this is the mantra Om, which is an example of a mantra, which is a sacred sound. And it's understood that these sounds can take you to specific states of mind. People also use mudras, these hand positions, all have symbols. So we have sort of fear not, teaching gesture. Each of these is believed to help you if you're trying to attain a specific state of mind. And then there are mandalas, which are used as maps of the deeper realms of the mind. And this is a traditional mandala that is called the Shri Yantra. Okay, so these are maps. And I talked at the beginning about the importance of mapping. And this is one thing that Hindu traditions do. They give you maps where many other places do not. And maps very often are kept secret. Sometimes you have to do initiations for them. Sometimes they're almost impossible to find. I was interviewing these Balinese Padandas, and a Padanda is a high priest, and Bali is in Indonesia. And the way they gave their maps was they would take a stick, draw it in the dirt, show it to a person, and then immediately wipe it away with a broom. It's almost impossible for scholars to find what this is. You know, they go through all this effort to find ancient texts, and there's no text. It's gone with the broom. I mean, this is the most careful I've ever heard of anybody with these maps. But usually they do keep them secret. Sometimes non-traditional mandalas may also be used. This was just kind of an interesting one, but I don't know anybody in Hindu who ever used this. And we move on from India onto psychedelic consciousness here. And here I'm including some of my own experiences. And this is something I never discuss with my classes in the United States, because in religious studies there's an absolute distinction between the observer and the participant. They do not want you participating in anything. And I have been involved in many debates about this topic, including at the American Academy of Religions. But it's very hard to get away from it. There's just a war between religious studies and theology that they've never quite overcome, which is another whole topic. Okay, so I never discussed it in classes. What I found was that there were hierarchical layers which could be transcended by the use of symbols. And different symbols led to different locales within these layers. And I'm including here some of my own sketches and writings. Okay, the first thing I did when I was in college, took LSD, and said, how in the heck does this work? And I could find no decent mapping to tell me, so I made my own. And in my case, it went from conscious to personal unconscious to collective unconscious. At this point, I had not read these people. I was doing this strictly on my own. And what I call the anima mundi realm, I had read some Neoplatonism. I had never read Hinduism or Buddhism. For some reason, I read Neoplatonism. So I called it the anima mundi realm, the realm of universal life. And through that, the formation realm of deities and paradises, of being itself, of Brahman, which I called it later, balancing it out with non-being to end up in a state of void or pure liberation. So these were states that I had entered specifically by meditation, which I did not know was meditation at the time. I just said, I want to know what reality is, and I meditated on the word reality. My mind became a sword, and I meditated on it for 8 solid hours on LSD. And I did not realize it was 8 solid hours, but I saw some amazing things during that time. And at the end of that, I decided this is what I was going to do with my life. I was going to explore these realms. So we begin with the conscious mind, which determines the goal and intent of the meditation. Goal is often in the form of the question, what is reality? That's my question. What exists ultimately? What is the difference between tripping and straight? For those of you who are familiar with this, this can be a very interesting question. And the person must move through the sensory distortions that occur at the beginning of psychedelic meditation. When you move over towards Hindu meditation, towards tantric and yogic meditation, what they call this is taking a sankalpa. And the sankalpa is your intention. Before you do any spiritual practice, and a spiritual practice is usually known as a sadhana, you say, this is my sankalpa. I do this for a reason. I do this to learn about something. I dedicate the merit of my action to helping somebody. I do it because I want to express love. You have some reason that you do it. Whatever that reason is, you keep that in mind. You don't just roam around and do it for the heck of it. And there are a lot of people today who will just take psychedelics and kind of ride around on buses, roam around and go to pubs. I mean, what you're supposed to be doing is doing this for a specific reason. That is your sankalpa. You take your vow before you do your sadhana, before you do your practice. Okay, and one of the places that you begin in your exploration should be understanding the imagination. Because the imagination can be very tricky. It can be a window or it can be a mirror. Okay, it can act as a mirror or a barrier or wall of distraction or projection screen, preventing people from being conscious of painful events. This was a view of Sigmund Freud. Or it can act as a window, opening the person to new dimensions of thought. And the way to turn the imagination into a window is through meditation. But you need to distinguish between whether you are seeing your own projection or whether you are seeing something beyond the individual. Okay, so this is an important thing to begin with. Learn what the nature of the imagination is for you and how it works. Okay, meditation. One moves through these layers of mind by means of yogic one-pointed meditation. One-pointed meditation means you focus on one thing and not a whole bunch of other things. You have total controlled focus. It's a technique of spiritual travel, and spiritual travel means that you do not stay in the body, you are actually leaving the body, and you are going elsewhere in the realms of consciousness. Through layers of consciousness, which could be compared to different viscosities of liquid. So you're kind of moving from one style of environment into another one. Such spiritual travel involves the piercing of veils of illusion and memory, called in Sanskrit Maya. When we talk about Maya, we are talking about the realms of illusion. Basically, everything here is Maya, and what you need to do is learn to make it transparent and see through it. A single goal is needed, or the mind will become distracted. So my goal was reality. One-pointed concentration, absolutely necessary for traveling. In tantric tradition, the person begins with the sadhana and the spiritual practice with the sankalpa, the intent. Simply exploring these realms for entertainment or to alleviate boredom are not considered acceptable reasons for doing the practice, once again. And I should note that Tantra in India is not the same as Tantra in California. Tantra in California means having sex and claiming it's spiritual. But Tantra in India is actually using mudras and mantras and mandalas to transcend attachment to the physical world. You're not supposed to be increasing your attachment to the physical world. You're supposed to be decreasing your attachment to the physical world. So there are some very different meanings of what these practices are. And the tantrics that I met in India were all horrified by what people thought of it in the United States. Okay, in one-pointed meditation, the mind becomes a pathway inwards and upwards, guided by a symbol. Okay, so here we have an image of the mind becoming a pathway of light and having a kind of a staircase going around it. So you are moving up the pathway of light. The symbol used may be a mantra or an image or a concept. This is a meditation on a Buddhist deity who is named White Tara, but really you can have meditation on any deity. When you visualize something, you see it in front of your eyes, so it becomes very clear and very bright and very strong. Okay, personal unconscious. Here we have the realm of memory, both positive and negative, both can attract the mind. But it's harder to travel through negative experiences and ignore them. For Freud, this was the entirety of the unconscious. However, under drug influence, one can find there's much more to the unconscious than memories of an individual life. Yogic detachment is necessary to avoid being drawn in by passions like rage. Okay, so this is an image of rage. Okay, so if you go into the unconscious without one-pointed meditation, okay, without yogic control, you can be taken over by the kinds of emotions that you see there. And this is not a good thing, because they'll just get you into those whirlpools, and you'll go round and around again, and you're not going to really accomplish anything. So you want to avoid being taken in by the passions. Love is nice, but you can get attracted to it. Desire is nice, you can get attracted to that. All these things are there in the unconscious, and they can all pull you in. And unless it is your sankalpa, your dedication to learn about love or learn about desire, then these are distractions. Okay? Or the personal unconscious may appear as a slop, a desire too powerful to resist, a fearful hell, or a collection of the people from the past with whom one has unfinished business. And if you read descriptions of psychedelic experiences from lots of different people, you'll see that there's a lot of entry into the personal unconscious. A lot of these kinds of experiences happen. When people do not have a disciplined way of dealing with it, they kind of get sucked in here and they spend time there. All of these can tempt the person away from accomplishing the stated intention of the trip. Okay, so the red eyes there are symbolic of desire. Okay, assuming that you manage to get through the personal unconscious, you then get to the collective unconscious. And here we start seeing some transpersonal images. Some areas include Jungian archetypes, powerful figures of creation and destruction at the roots of the self. One may also enter the area of past lives and start to re-experience lives from long ago, visiting other times and worlds. Some people enter areas of psychic phenomena, including knowledge at a distance, clairvoyance, and clairaudience. One may encounter archetypes such as those of the great and destructive mother. The great mother is that one, and the destructive mother is the destructive looking one. Such images can have great power. So you can have a positive image of the mother, and that can become your entire world, and it becomes a very interesting kind of experience. But again, it depends if that's your goal. Or you can experience other archetypes, such as images of the heroic and the erotic. Or you may be aware of being bound to the realm of rebirth. And you start to feel yourself going around and around on the wheel of life and death. So we have our experiences from other times and places. And it says, one point of focus is important. Without distractions, or one may be confused and trapped. And this is an image of one point of meditation. The little pearl in the middle is what you should be focused on, but the hands going in other directions are what actually goes on in your mind. And these are my sketches, so don't look too close for exact artistic perfection. They're sketches. Although this one came pretty close. And I didn't do this with computer graphics. This one is actually just all acrylics. But memories may be coded in geometrical forms, and one must travel past them. Okay, now, one of the interesting things, among many interesting things in psychedelic experiences, is that you can see how memories are coded. You can see how the areas of the mind can open up. Now, just to see if you have ability in this area. Now, you notice that this is actually a diamond shape. Okay, all these ones going in. And these things are squares. Now, look closely, I'll give you a minute, and see if you can see the squares moving outwards and the diamonds moving inwards at the same time. Okay, 20 seconds, go. One moving out, one moving in. Okay, close enough. You can get them moving. Hands higher. Okay, we got about a third of them. Okay, you guys have great potential for meditation because that is how you open up a mandala. I actually got the details right on this one. And once you start seeing these things moving, so they're going outwards and inwards at the same time, that is how you open them up. That is the key to going from one level to another. When you can get a mandala to open up that way, you can travel to another world. Okay? So this is a very useful skill for those of you who have this skill. For those of you who don't, more sadhana is needed. Okay. Light itself may act as a symbol for transcendence. So sometimes you'll see coming out of your body piles of white light. In this case, it was kind of tinged with gold. So as the dark room became full of rainbows, and there was white light that was tinged with golden flames. So that's a kind of nice image of light coming down. The inner light becomes more bright and real than the body. And sometimes this is associated with Kundalini Yoga, where you start seeing this light coming in through the heart and going down through your spine. And the deeper self opens up. This one just struck me as funny. I kind of like the image of the zipper. So your inner world is being opened up by a zipper, and you are seeing the light within. The next realm encountered is what I call the anima mundi, the realm of universal life. And if you look closely at those trees, you'll notice they have faces on them. And that is showing that they actually have life and personality, that in fact consciousness is everywhere. It is not limited to human beings. It is not limited to brains. It is in every cell. It is in every molecule. It's in every atom. Anima mundi is universal life consciousness. Consciousness is not limited to humanity, as one might intuitively identify with birds as they fly, or trees as they absorb sunlight, or lions as they hunt. And if you talk to people who have done psychedelics, very often they'll identify with different aspects of nature. And they will have sort of close experiences with forests and jungles and that sort of thing. I would call this the anima mundi state. Sometimes translated as the world soul, it connects all living beings. As Plato put it, the cosmos is a living creature with soul and reason. It also fits to some extent with the Eastern idea of samsara, the many worlds of incarnation and consciousness. Though, as I noted when I first experienced it, I never heard of samsara. Okay, this awareness of other forms of consciousness is often called shamanism or animism today. And there are many people who are interested in going to shamans to experience this sort of animism. And the sorts of drugs that they would take would be more like, say, ayahuasca and LSD. Shamans were understood to be able to communicate with birds or other animals with skills from long apprenticeships. So when you became a shaman, what you would do would be apprentice with a shaman who had been doing it for a long time, and that shaman would teach you how to communicate with the birds or the trees or whatever your power animal would be. But psychedelics can facilitate entrance into the anima mundi state without instruction. So this is one way of getting around your shamanic initiation. However, as I have noted, it's not a good idea to skip stages. You really should go through the initiations if you can. Life forms encountered can be rich and varied. Once you are in the anima mundi state, you're starting to notice that there's a lot of strange forms of consciousness out there. You can encounter other cultures and their histories and life forms. These are the fair folk from Ireland. The mind runs through the world soul like currents in an ocean. Okay, so you go running, your mind goes through the anima mundi realms like currents, going all over infinity. One can visit strange new worlds. Oops. And navigate new techniques of spiritual travel. So here we see a world opening up that you can enter, because following the light is always the best way to go. Meditation can be a challenge, as pathways and currents can be like labyrinths, and they're difficult to follow. So you try to go past that or through that, and one point in meditation can be difficult. Things okay? Yeah. But this is the life force that animates the cosmos. And this state is still below the levels of gods and their heavens. Transcendence through it gives entrance to the realms of deities and their paradises. Pathways may have organic or crystalline images. Okay, so once you're going through this universal life state, you start to go through these organic and crystalline states that lead to the paradises and hells of various religions. And as the yogi travels inwards, always focused on the center, where the deity can appear. So this little GIF happened to be a good image, I thought, which shows how you go inwards. Now, if you can focus your mind right on the center there, as everything's kind of moving, okay, that's what meditation feels like. Or let's put it this way, that's what transcendent meditation feels like. If you can keep that focus while everything else is moving, you are going from world to world. Sometimes organic and crystalline forms are combined. And some religious symbols can work to balance and orient the explorer in these complex realms. So what we have here is the image of a vajra, which is the symbol of Tibetan Buddhism, with a compass showing directions. And this was done by Jim, who was sitting over there. Some gateways have guardians and wrathful forms of deities to deter the unworthy. So if you're not ready to go into a paradise, you can get scared away. And guardians can be frightening, and they can be in classical or individual forms. This is one I actually saw. He was not welcoming. They may send people into the many hell worlds of religion and myth. Which may include both images of heat and cold. There's been a lot of very creative work done on images of hells. But assuming that you are worthy and you are not sneaky and you're not trying for some sort of greed and harm, then you can go into the realms of deity. And there are loads of them. The paradise is where consciousness forms itself into cosmic beings. Okay, this is an entire area you can visit. One may enter them through detachment or through devotional love. And this is a sketch of Buddha kind of rising out of the heart. So that's a devotional image. Such love can combine eros and bliss. There's an image, a sketch of that. And sometimes it can feel as if it's bursting forth. So that's kind of a spontaneous sketch. But it can feel like spontaneously, as opposed to in a controlled yogic fashion. And even to the point of pain. So once you start opening the heart, it can really open wide. Now, when you go to the realm of deities, you can see one god or many. Kind of takes your choice, or an infinity of deities in one. There's loads of different images you can choose. Each deity may have his or her own heaven, and come down from that state to reveal ideas to visionaries. And this is an image of a deity coming down. Such realms can take many forms. One can encounter and communicate with gods and Buddhas and bodhisattvas, that's from the Buddhist tradition. Sometimes in great detail. And you can see a lot of these images that came out of people's visions. Here's the heaven of a Buddhist savioress, Green Tara. She comes from Vajrayana Buddhism. And deities are often understood as personifications of deeper forces. So sometimes you'll see writers on myth who say, oh, Jupiter, represents one thing and Hades represents something else. So sometimes we associate gods with qualities. This is something we see in this world. But really, one understands them best by looking past their outer forms, though their forms may be beautiful. Spiritual travelers should not be hypnotized by the forms of deities, unless you've made a vow that you want to see a form of a deity. Otherwise, there are going to be distractions too. For those who can keep yogic detachment in the midst of psychedelic brilliance, Okay, again, this is what you may be challenged with. Can you keep your focus on one point, looking at that? Well, it's not easy. And go beyond awareness that's personified into images and figures. This was a not entirely successful sketch, but what I was trying to do was to show that you have all these kinds of things moving around and that they can form themselves into personalities and faces, as well as into geometrical forms. It's a little too complex to do in magic markers. But what the heck, I was 20 years old. Okay, there's entry into paradises and heaven worlds, and great potential for revelatory knowledge. As the ordinary self dissolves, and that's the image of a person dissolving, with the self kind of dissolving from the inside to the outside, so there's like a waterfall of light coming through. For example, in Vajrayana Buddhism, secrets are traditionally revealed by dakinis. Okay, and here we get into something that starts to be a bit more controversial, as if these other things weren't controversial. Sometimes they reveal worlds to visit, and here we have an image of a dakini who is a supernatural being who is showing these different kinds of places to go. There's one showing symbolically what it means to be bound to time. Those things back there are hourglasses, and they were being played like drums. And from the dakinis, we move to dakini language. Now, the major challenge of dakini language, of this sort of revelation, is that deities do not communicate in English. They don't even communicate in words. They use complexes of imagery, emotions, and geometrical forms, which then must be transformed into words. And these visionary complexes of information need to be understood intuitively. So, what I'm talking about here is the way that at a very deep level, ideas and revelations are communicated. And it's not easy to explain. Okay, I've done psychedelic meditation, many religious traditions, and for this one I'll focus on Buddhism because I was talking about dakini language. And I mentioned the two styles of light and deity and emptiness and void. We have several schools of Buddhism. And I decided to give an example of my translations from each style of path. One of light and creativity, which we might call the Mahayana tradition in Buddhism, and the other one of emptiness and dissolution, which is closer to the Dzogchen form of Vajrayana Buddhism. Okay, not to get too esoteric here, but these are kind of obscure traditions. And what I'm doing is actually talking to the guys who are there. So here are the words from Amida, the Buddha of Light and Compassion in Pure Land Buddhism. Okay, so you see the little statue there? That's him. And I asked about him in the way that I always ask informants, which is, tell me about yourself. And this is what he had to say. Okay. I am Amida, Buddha of the Moonlit Garden. I welcome those who seek truth and liberation. I offer them the lotus seat of welcome. My paradise is peaceful and tranquil for true seekers who wish to escape the noise and bondage of the worlds of incarnation. Here they can meditate in peace, free of passion and sweat and death. Here they are tranquil and compassionate, walking the jeweled path to freedom. This paradise has pathways scattered with pearls and moonstones. The calling birds chime and the wind rustles. The leaves of trees bearing golden fruit. The mountains shimmer with blue and lavender. In them sit many future Buddhas in meditation, hidden by the shining mists. It's a garden of moonlight where the moon is larger than the sky. And that's a very interesting image if you try to visualize it. And the clouds that hide it sparkle with awareness. The ponds and fountains splash with insight and new ideas. The waterfalls rush down with inspiration. The temple bells chime with liberation. Here's a paradise for the pure to keep them from falling into karmic bondage. Along its peaceful and beautiful paths come insights falling like dew in the morning. It's a world of light, only taking form for those who visit and are still attached to it. We bless the lonely, encourage the shy, quiet the restless, and expel the desirous and dishonest. This paradise is not easy to gain. People chant for Emerita's grace, but most do not come here. Instead, they come to its lower reflections. Where the light is muted, the forms are more enduring. Here people are saved from the results of their sins. In this world, they get a second chance to make right what was wrong. They can fulfill their obligations, apologize to those they have harmed. They can find out their errors and correct them. Here they can choose a future. They can stay in the paradise to help others, or return to earth to help the suffering. Or they can go to the higher paradise of moonlight, or they can incarnate again to complete their works. When their chains are broken and they're free of bondage, then they truly have free will by surrendering totally to the Buddha's love. I'm the Buddha of moonlight. I sit on a white lotus throne. Its radiance and fragrance fills the worlds. For those who pray in my name, I say, bless all the people that you know in order to receive the Buddha's blessings. At death, hold up your bound hands, and I shall release you. By surrendering to my compassion, you shall gain your freedom. Okay, this is an example of talking to someone in one of these worlds. It is not in English. It was done all in terms of abstract forms knitted together by emotions. But it's an interesting way to learn about how other beings think. And then we have the black bikini, but it depends on our time. Do we have time for another poem, or should I keep going?
We've got about,
10 more minutes to say. Yeah.
Okay, it's about 5 minutes. Okay, and here we have a very different sort of being, but also of the Buddhist tradition. I am the black bikini goddess of the void. I'm night sky empty of stars, the lake without reflection. When I take on human form, I'm wrathful in appearance, with skin and hair that is blue-black, and jewelry that is jet and ebony. In a sky of deep sapphire blue, I sit on a lotus with petals of gold, in the center of black velvet. When I have 2 hands, I hold the vajra and the bell. When I have 4 hands, I also hold the noose and the goad. In my 6-armed form, I add the axe and the mala. My true form is in the depths of space, the vast reaches of silence, but with the sound of whom I emerge in the form of a spinning black vajra edged in gold. Around me are whom's like beads on a string, spinning, exploding, shooting blue pearls of light in every direction. I am called by many names. As Nairakmia, I'm the dark face of the void, the waves upon the lightless ocean. I'm the crow-headed goddess flying high, my feathers in black, green, blue, and purple. I'm the black goddess of death holding the world in my arms as I return to the deep waters. I'm the mother who brings forth children from dark nothingness, who watches their lives and their deaths. I'm a wrathful emanation of Vajradakini, she is the rainbow crystal, yet I'm also her origin out of the dark void. I dance with my Bhairava to the drumbeats of the heart of the universe, and from our dance come millions of whirling comets who form the guardians of the Vajra world. When the dances stop, the comets return, and the universe is reabsorbed into our footsteps. She warns the traveler, I may give help to the aspirant, but I'm dangerous, for I will take away all he or she possesses. If he gives them up gladly, we'll dance together in their ashes, but if he clings to them, he'll lose his mind and his heart. I seek only beings ready for liberation. Leave all behind, and we will find beauty in the emptiness that remains. Okay, so these are 2 examples of communication with very different kinds of beings. I figured it would a useful thing to know that these things could happen. Okay, so beyond the realms of heavens and deities is a state I could only call being itself. It's also the Hindu Satchidananda, being, consciousness, and bliss, full of radiance, Brahman. All form is dissolved in infinite light, and there is no longer any separation into observer and observed. In psychedelic experience, I found the realm of being to be balanced by a realm of non-being, pure dissolution of form. And beyond that, there's the total freedom of the void. When passions are overcome, what is left is freedom. And there's a liberated person there. The true nature of the mind has been a topic of contemplation for thousands of years. We continue to explore it even today, though in new ways and with new tools. Psychedelics are one such tool for the exploration of the spirit, like older techniques of fasting, chanting, self-mortification, and sensory deprivation. The end. Thank you.
Fantastic talk. That was incredibly clear and super fascinating. We have time for about 15 minutes of questions. We'll also be going to the pub afterwards, so you can ask June more questions one-on-one if you have questions.
It was so clear, I didn't know what to say.
Use the term maps a lot in terms of trying to, I guess, summarize your experiences. And maps, technically, while corresponding to reality, aren't a one-to-one relationship with them. So I'm curious, like, now that you have a better map of your perception of reality, have you had any personal experiences that you could share that have allowed you to better navigate reality as it is, in terms of first experiences or challenges you've had?
Also, June, can you just paraphrase the question speaking to the mic, just so
Okay. Swap the glass for the mic. Yeah, because I have a kind of, let's see, how would we phrase this? I kind of do research along two different lines. I have academic research, which I still do and I still publish. And here was a visiting research fellow. And then I have the personal research. And these maps that I've made are incredibly useful because I still explore these places. And I talk to the guys who are there. And even if the poetry sounds like it goes on a bit, I mean, what it does is it describes the kinds of worlds that are out there. And I am interested in what kinds of worlds are out there. So by knowing how to work with mantras and how to work with mandalas, I have access to worlds that I would not have access to otherwise. And I have many descriptions of them. Books upon books. What would be an example? Well, let's see, we're in England. Last time I was in Ireland, I started meditating on some of the mantras that I found in folklore stories of the fair folk, and ended up having a whole conversation with them and going through their worlds and looking at their art galleries. And it was really interesting. But if I didn't know how to use mantras, that would never have happened. So what it does is it adds whole new areas of potential knowledge. So the maps tell you where to go, but it's true, the maps are not going there, they just point the way.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have you sort of experimented with your own mind with stuff like DMT, ayahuasca, peyote, anything like that? Or has it just mainly been through LSD and yoga meditation?
Well, unfortunately, I live in South Carolina. And in the United States, this is sometimes called the buckle of the Bible Belt. And as a professor of religion, my options are limited. I have done MDMA, and I thought it was an absolutely wonderful drug. It just opened up my heart to infinite compassion. Interestingly, there's another guy who is part of the MAPS organization, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies in the U.S., who's doing all this research on MDMA, Michael Mithofer. And Michael had the exact same experience with MDMA in terms of opening the heart to universal compassion. So I have done that. But actually, I have never done mushrooms. Well, I would think this would be something I would have done, but somehow they just never showed up. So I wait for some future event on that.
Yes, in the back.
Have you found a particular form of meditation that you use that really kind of mimics the psychedelic state with the greatest ease? And that's one question. Another one is, what's your preferred way to deal with philosophical materialist and mainstream scientific paradigm skepticism when you're talking about these kinds of things?
Your second question got me caught up there for a minute. What was the first question again?
Okay, do you have a form of meditation you've discovered that brings you to the psychedelic kinds of spaces most easily?
Fast answer, no. The psychedelic spaces are way up there, and where I can go ordinarily is there. I mean, it would be nice to be able to have that kind of intensity. I've never had that energy. Maybe at some point I will develop it, but things I haven't done psychedelics in so long. I don't know, perhaps I'm forgetting the details. But no, I've not been able to duplicate those kinds of states. So I've gone to the intermediate worlds, which is why the maps are useful, because I can point out where I went. As for the skeptics, well, when I got my first job out of my doctorate, it was in a department of analytic philosophers. And for any of you who know what those guys are like, forget it. You just can't even discuss this kind of thing. So, despite many attempts, I have given up trying to explain these things to them because they're just never going to listen. I mean, there may be some kind of way to do it, but if so, I haven't discovered it.
Yes, in the great, sorry.
I just wanted to ask about your mantra practice. What do you find is the most beneficial? Do you chant? Do you recite? Do you write it down? Do you sort of internalize it? How do you receive the most clarity?
Well, it's an interesting sort of question. It depends. I'll go back to the Sankalpa. If it is my goal to go into simply a relaxed state or an inner state or an aware state, I'll just sort of chant and visualize life. But if I'm doing something along the lines of writing, which I do quite a bit of, like the little poems that I told you about here, those are not limited to Buddhism. I've done that in a lot of different traditions. What I found is that each tradition has its own suitable mantra. So I use the mantra to go to a particular tradition to either talk to a particular deity or to go into a particular environment. So there are different mantras for different goals. The same thing with mandalas. Mandalas are like big safes with locks on them. And when you have a mantra, it opens up the safe, it opens up the lock. So when you have the mantra and the mandala together, which is what you normally get in initiation, then you open up that world. So it depends which world you want to go to.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that in Western traditions, generations, people generally don't accept that sort of the idea that desires or traumas come from past lives.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me of the idea of generational traumas, and that we carry sort of past experiences from our parents or past generations. I'm curious whether you think that's a useful comparison or something quite different to kind of the Hindu understandings that you were describing.
Well, we can say it's sort of similar. But in generational trauma, what you are experiencing today, assuming you have one, might be what happened to your grandmother or your great-grandfather. But if you are looking at it from the Hindu perspective, you're experiencing what happened to you in these other times. So both of them are associated with the past, but one of them would be particular to your soul. The other would be how your soul is in some fashion shared with that of your relatives and your ancestors. You know, exactly how that sharing goes on is an interesting sort of question. Some people would say, well, the trauma got carried on because your grandmother took it out on your mother, who then took it out on you. Other people would say, well, it somehow got onto a sort of family karma that got passed down through the ages. So it would sort of depend on your metaphysics.
Yes, Natasha.
What is your take on, like, I guess, the reality or ontological status of these worlds? Like, would you say they're, like, as real as, like, the physical world, or is it something that exists only in the mind? Like, what's your ideas around that?
Well, the mind is a big thing. I would say, in terms of my experience, they've been more real than this world. So all of the worlds are in some sense processed through the mind. This world is processed through the mind. Your mind is processed through your mind. Other worlds are processed through your mind. So they're all data. And it's just sort of a matter of where you place your most value. If to you the inner worlds are most valuable, then they're going to be most real, and this world won't be important. If this is the world you value, the other ones won't be real, and they won't be what you value. They won't be important. So I wouldn't say one is more important than the other. Sympathizing with the Hindu and Buddhist perspectives, I would say they're all illusion.
In the yellow shirt.
You mentioned sankalpas, and I think you mentioned one about finding more about reality, but could you mention another sankalpa and how broad can these be, or how specialized?
Well, in the tantric tradition, okay, not California tantra, Indian tantra, what you do is you say, I want to accomplish something. I do this practice in order to learn something, to get somewhere, to find out a truth. And then you go out and you find out the truth, or you accomplish what you want. Now, you can have it, I suppose, as broad as you want. I mean, if you say, I want to become one with a god, well, that's your sankalpa. I guess you can work on that. But it's relatively rare that people have ones that are that ambitious. You know, usually people say things like, well, you know, I have this pain in my right knee. I'm going to find out the source of it psychically. Or, you know, I always wonder why I love that woman so much when she doesn't pay any attention to me. Maybe there's something going on there. Let me psychically understand my emotions. So it can be pretty broad, I think. Yeah, the idea is just to have a focus.
Time for one more question. Nor?
How's your exploration into all of this affected your ability to connect with people who are kind of on a different wavelength? Like, do you feel like there's a separation between you and people you meet? And does your research into all of this bring you closer or further away from people?
I don't know, I guess it depends on the person. There are some people I find harder to talk to, and in fact, living in the buckle of the Bible Belt, it does mean that there is a kind of limited community, we might say, for ability to talk about that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's always other things to talk about. The weather, the government, complaining about the government, complaining about the weather. But I find it makes for more interesting discussions when I find people that I do have something in common with. But it's possible it also gives me less patience for small talk. And unfortunately, I live in a town full of small talk, so yeah, that can be a disadvantage.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you especially to June for coming all the way to give this talk.